I'm your bedtime historian, and tonight I find it oddly comforting that the same river that drowns secrets also births legends. Funny how water remembers and forgets in equal measure. A hush settles where reeds meet moonlight. Somewhere far back in time, a tribe forms around a bend in the river gathered by whispers, by drifting embers, by promises wrapped in mist. They trade stories that smell of wood smoke and wet earth voices, tangled with the hush of owls overhead. Why here? Why now? Only the stars overhead know winking their secrets down onto the restless water. If drifting along these banks feels cozier than your tomorrow's to-do list, maybe leave a sleepy like and subscribe keeps this old voice afloat on the tide of algorithms. Do you ever wonder which forgotten river your dreams would settle beside tonight? Tell me if you do somewhere out there. We're all sharing the same hush. Now dim, the lights maybe crack the window for a whisper of night air, and drift with me into this gathering dusk. You stand where the river curves like a question mark carved into the sleeping land. The air carries a hint of fish-damp clay and the faint sweetness of crushed reeds under bare feet. Here before kingdoms and crowns, you listen as the first families gather. They arrive in twos and threes voices, low glancing over shoulders as if the dark might listen in. A mother hushes her children with a lullaby, older than any written word, just a hum that floats over the trickle of water. A father carries driftwood under one arm, salt lines on his cheeks, from a day's toil upstream. Some come from far hills, where the language bends, vowels differently. Others drift in from marshes, where the frogs never quiet. Tonight, they stand together on this wet riverbank, eyeing one another with cautious nods, their silence stitched with curiosity. Historians still argue whether this gathering was planned or born of chance. Surviving scraps of pottery and broken bone knives offer hints but no certainty. What is known is that the river made promises fish, for hunger water, for thirst secrecy, for plots whispered under starlight. Quirky as it sounds, some elders claim the river itself spoke to the oldest among them, murmuring bargains in the hush between sleep and wakefulness. You feel the mud ooze between your toes as you drift closer. A boy tosses a pebble in lazy arcs across the dark surface, each splash like a small drumbeat of what's to come. An old woman, her back bent like a willow, presses her palm to the river's skin, murmuring a name you don't understand. There's a smell of smoke, now the first hint that fire will soon join water in binding this gathering together. Look deeper. You'll see two men's eyes locked in a silent pact over a handful of smoked fish. One flicks his fingers to the stars, swearing an oath that drifts up with the sparks when they light the kindling. It's here, in these murmurs and glances, that the seed of a people is sown. They stand on borrowed land, but tonight they claim it not with weapons, but with stories, half-truths, traded like beads. Some scholars remain puzzled by the speed at which these families bonded. Without script or banner, they built belonging from gossip and ghost tales shared beside the flowing dark. The children restless tug at their mother's skirts, asking if they can sleep under the sky. Permission is granted with a nod, and soon tiny shapes curl like question marks on rush mats, dreaming of tomorrow's fish traps and the soft slap of oars. The river whispers on. Overhead, a shooting star tears a quick secret through the night. Maybe it's a sign of unity, of warning, or simply of the endless stories waiting to be told. You stand among them now, a drifting ghost in reed and starlight, breathing in the birth of something fragile and vast. Sleep comes easy when you listen to how it all began, with hushes and ripples, with trust and suspicion braided so tightly you can't tell one from the other. So you linger a little longer, feet, damp eyes, lifted to where the sky spills stars like breadcrumbs for tomorrow's dreamers. A soft wind stirs the ashes of yesterday's whispers. Tonight's sparks will leap higher than fear has ever dared. You stand close to where the first circle of fire breathes warmth into the damp air. Someone kneels to coax dry moss into flame breath, steady fingers deft. The smell of singed grass mixes with the sharper tang of charred driftwood, and soon the flicker grows bold enough to chase away the darkness that clung to the tribe's shoulders. One by one, they shuffle closer, drawn by the promise of heat of safety, of stories that can't be told in the cold alone. This fire is more than flame. It's the heartbeat of a settlement yet unnamed. It hums with secrets, crackles with half-formed promises, and offers a light that no rival shadow can swallow whole. The first sparks might have come from a flint strike or a stolen ember carried in a hollowed gourd. Surviving tales disagree. Some say a wanderer brought it from far uplands, a gift traded for 3 fish and a bone comb. Others claim it rose like a miracle when the tribe's eldest muttered charms into the moss. There is no scholarly consensus on how exactly this first blaze was born, but here it burns stubborn and warm. Children dart in and out of the glow shadows, dancing behind them like playful spirits. A boy holds out his hands to feel the warmth eyes wide at the wonder of flame that does not vanish with the wind. A woman feeds the fire, a dry branch, and mutters something under her breath, perhaps a thank you, or a warning that greed can turn warmth to ash. You circle the gathering slowly, invisible but present. The people shift closer together, knees brushing shoulders, leaning in the distance between stranger and kin, shrinking with each pop of sap and sigh of smoke. Someone begins to hum, a tune lifted from a distant valley, carried by feet weary of wandering. The melody loops like a lazy river, inviting a second voice to join, then a third. The fire crackles louder, embers snapping like seeds of future tales. A curious detail, near the edge of the circle, 2 old rivals sit shoulder to shoulder, silent, but sharing warmth all the same. Their goats may still vanish, under suspicious circumstances come dawn, but tonight the blaze buys them an uneasy truce. Flames erase grudges faster than sharpened sticks ever could. Somewhere beyond the ring of light eyes, watch. Wild dogs rival scouts, or just the restless dark itself. No one stirs to find out. Instead, the people stay wrapped in this fragile bubble of warmth and hush. A young girl tosses a twist of herbs into the flames, sage and wild mint. The smoke coils upward, carrying a sweet hush that soothes the chattering children into sleep. Historians argue whether this fire was ever meant to last more than a single night. Maybe it wasn't, but flicker by flicker, the tribe learned that embers banked in ash could survive till dawn, then feed the next night's circle. They learned to guard the flame, to feed it carefully, to trust that its glow could guard them in return. You feel the fire's warmth kiss your cheeks as you drift closer. Sparks leap like tiny fireflies into the black chasing stars that pretend not to notice. Around you, voices soften into murmurs, breath slows, heads nod. The first fire has done its work, binding wanderers with warmth and weaving tomorrow's kinship in smoke and song. Somewhere deep in the hush, beyond the ring, the river watches patient as always. Its promise holds steady water by day, flame by night. Together, they draw these drifting families, into a circle that no night can break. A thin mist curls over the waking river as dawn creeps in mud reeds, and a whisper of smoke clings to your hair like the tribe's first fragile claim on this place. You drift among the new shapes rising from the riverbank, a patchwork of reed huts and lumps of clay plastered by calloused hands. Each shelter stands a little taller than the last rough walls, smeared with river silt roofs woven from brittle grasses. In the half-light, they look like sleeping beasts, huddled for warmth. They creak when the wind pushes through, but they stand a sign that these people mean to stay. Inside the biggest hut, a mother tucks her children into nests of straw and woven mats. The smell of damp earth and human closeness fills the narrow space. She murmurs a story about a spirit in the reeds who guides good dreams to the children who lie still. It's no grand myth, just a thread in the cloth of belonging, a gentle hush to make new walls feel like a promise. Outside men pack clay, between split reeds, their fingers raw and nails rimmed with grit. They laugh through chattering teeth when the river wind steals their warmth. A girl squats by a half-built wall, tracing patterns in the mud with a stick symbols perhaps, or idle scratches to pass the hours. Some shards of these marks survive to this day, pressed into broken pottery, though scholars still argue whether they were mere decoration or the first clumsy letters of a forgotten tongue. Look closer, and you'll spot a curious trick near the huts. Thin rows of reeds are replanted coaxed to bend the river's flow, just enough to keep the banks from swallowing their new dwellings. It's small, clever, easily missed, yet it shows these people are not just surviving, but shaping the land to hold them. A whispered alliance between human hands and the river's restless will. In a corner, near the biggest fire pit, an elder sits cross-legged, eyes closed, listening to the low gossip of the settlement. He hums to himself, the tune weaving through the hammer of mud against wattle, the splash of buckets lifted from the shallows. Every sound carries a seed of tomorrow goats might graze here soon. A smokehouse might rise beside the huts. Children's feet might wear paths where reeds once claimed their kingdom. It's easy to overlook how precious these first huts are, rough, drafty, constantly patched. But each one pins a family to the earth. Each clay lump says we will not drift tonight. Fires crackle behind thin walls, warming hands that once knew only the chill of roaming hills. Surviving accounts conflict on how long it took to transform this scatter of huts into a village worth a name. Some say a single moon cycle, others claim whole seasons passed before the dwellings circled together like a herd finding safety and closeness. But all agree that the first roof that didn't leak felt like a crown won from the sky itself. You stand in the hush before dawn, breathing the wet promise of clay and river water. Somewhere behind you, a child's giggle breaks the sleepy quiet proof that these walls hold more than shelter. They hold a spark of tomorrow's kingdom, fragile as smoke and sturdy as mud. Dawn fog curls low over the huts as a single voice rises above the murmurs, authority carried not by force, but by a promise, whispered through drifting campfire smoke. You stand at the edge of the largest clearing, where the new huts cluster like stubborn reeds refusing the river's pull. Here they gather again, the people of mud and fire huddled in a wide circle, around a man whose shoulders bear the weight of their restless hopes. He's no king, no crown gleams on his brow, no guards stand at his back, but when he lifts a hand, the hush settles like a warm blanket. He speaks with a voice roughened by nights in the damp air, telling them of what could be. No grand proclamations, just the shape of a future that tastes sweeter than drifting rootless. He promises a place where children grow under the same roof that sheltered their mothers, where goats are fat and fish plentiful, where stories cling to firesides longer than any winter chill. The people lean in, catching each word as if it might slip into the river and vanish if they don't hold it fast. Some scholars still argue over this first leader's name, if he had one at all. A handful of bone tokens etched with stick figures have surfaced from this era, but whether they mark a chieftain's title or merely a trader's tallies remains debated in dusty archives. But the stories persist: a figure with a furred cloak thrown over simple linen, a voice that could quiet feuding brothers, and hands scarred from the same mud walls his people built. Nearby, a young boy stares wide-eyed at this man, whose promises sound braver than sharpened spears. He clutches a twig, like a scepter, echoing gestures, imagining himself someday standing in that same hush, making promises to faces flickering in firelight. A girl at his side rolls her eyes and nudges him, her grin saying kingdoms grow not just from vows, but from laughter and stubborn neighbors who know when to mock a boy playing at power. It's a curious detail buried in surviving folk songs. This chieftain never sat on a carved throne, but on a rough log at the edge of the circle, close enough for smoke to sting his eyes like anyone else's. Some claim it was a sign that unity meant standing shoulder to shoulder, not above. Others mutter that the log kept him near enough to hear the village gossip secrets whispered as freely as the wind through reeds. Tonight, you feel the hush, too soft and expectant. The man's voice drifts across the crowd, like drifting sparks alliances with distant wanderers, raids no longer feared, but turned aside with gifts of fish or warm furs. He speaks of boundaries no rival can breach if they stand as one. Every word feeds the embers of belief that flicker in tired eyes. And when the fire pops and someone laughs, startled the chieftain grins too, because he knows what every leader must have promised without warmth is just smoke that slips through cold fingers. You stand unseen among them, the circle tight around your shoulders, the hush deep enough to drown the river's endless gossip. In the glow of this night, a leader emerges, not crowned, not chosen by force, but by the oldest rule of all. Trust freely given is stronger than any blade. A stray dog's bark echoes through the damp reeds, an uneasy reminder that where warmth gathers shadows, linger close behind. You drift beyond the reach of the central fire, out where the huts stand thin, and the night presses a little closer. Here the tribe's fragile unity meets its first test, not by open war, but by the silent footsteps of jealous neighbors who watch the glow from afar. Rival clans kin by blood, but strangers by loyalty slip through the dark like foxes sniffing at the edge of a chicken yard. They come not with roaring armies or grand banners, but with stealth raids and sharp knives meant for goats and fish traps. The soft bleat of a stolen goat at midnight tells a clearer story than any shouted threat. One morning, a young boy finds hoofprints and torn rope near the river, proof that trust can be bled dry one bleat at a time. Surviving scraps of bone and charred wood hint at these early raids, though historians squabble over whether they were acts of petty thievery or calculated probes to test how deep the new tribe's roots really reached. Some old songs even claim it was once a playful ritual, a game between cousins, turned sour when hunger clamped jaws too tight. In the smoky hush around the main fire, people trade worried glances. The chieftain sits a little straighter, ears pricked, for rumors slipping through the hush like night air through reed walls. A boy whispers of footprints by the goat pens. An elder murmurs of strangers glimpsed at dawn half hidden by drifting fog. The hush grows teeth. What once bound them, stories, warmth fish, now bristles with suspicion. But still, they don't scatter. Instead, they gather closer at night, children bundled tighter under Matt's goats, tethered near the huts, where watchful eyes linger longer than sleep. A mother sharpens a stick by firelight, more for comfort than threat. A father weaves reed fences in the shallows, hoping to make the path to the goat pens just inconvenient enough for a quick thief to turn away. One curious bit, a hollow gourd, found many seasons later, buried near the first huts, sealed with a plug of clay. Inside, bits of goat fur and scorched ash, a sign perhaps of charms, meant to ward off envious eyes. Some scholars remain divided. Was this simple folk magic, or the first awkward steps toward the laws and protections that would come later? Near the river's bend, you see two boys kneeling in the silt, whispering about building a trap. A tangle of reeds and stones to catch sneaky feet before they slip back into the dark. They giggle as they work their plan half game, half defense. Even fear, it seems, can bind people tighter than comfort alone. You drift through this restless hush, half trust, half doubt. The fire's glow feels precious now, each spark a promise that shadows can be turned away if enough eyes stay open. Overhead, the stars prick through drifting mist witnesses to the hush, the fear, and the stubborn resolve that holds this fragile circle together. A reed whistle blows somewhere upstream, thin, eerie, a signal that fear can soften when promises flow like water under moonlight. You slip down to the river's edge again, where voices hover just above the ripple and hush. After the first stolen goats and stealthy footprints, the tribe's fire might have burned alone had the river not offered a pact. Here in the dusk light, you watch leaders from both the fledgling settlement and their restless neighbors stand ankle-deep in chilly shallows, fish baskets drifting between them like silent witnesses. No grand handshake, no binding scroll, just an exchange of nods, a handful of fresh-caught fish, and quiet murmurs that promise, take this part of the river. Leave the goats in peace. Some say it was superstition that sealed the deal night offerings dropped into the water, a carved fishbone, a splash of milk, an unspoken plea that the river spirit keep the truce alive longer than human patience might. Historians continue to debate whether this so-called river pact was the first sign of organized law, or just a clever ruse to buy time while reed fences thickened around goat pens. Some fragments of charred wood, dredged from the riverbed, hint at old altars hidden beneath the waterline proof. Perhaps that secret offerings went hand in hand with whispered agreements. You kneel in the shallows beside them, cold mud curling between your toes. Lantern light flickers across the ripples as an elder drifts a bundle of herbs downstream, wild mint and crushed reeds fragrant enough to mask the scent of unease. Children squat near the bank, peering at silver fish darting beneath their fingers. They don't yet grasp that the fish swimming free tonight carry the weight of tomorrow's peace. A curious side note drifts through the hush. Some elders believed the river demanded gifts, not just of fish, but of secret stories poured into the water at night, so gossip and grudges would slip away on the current. A mother hushes her daughter, warning that careless words tossed into the shallows might come back twisted on another tongue. On the bank, the chieftain stands apart, watching the moonlight dance across the pack's quiet witnesses. He says nothing, no loud claim, no grand vow, because here, the river does the speaking. Tomorrow's raids might still come. Shadows might still creep among huts. But tonight, the current hums a promise for every stolen goat, a fish returned. For every shadow, a flame guarded by fresh trust. You drift back up the bank, listening to reeds hiss in the soft wind. The fire circle glows brighter against the dark, now fed by fish and fragile hope alike. Somewhere, a boy laughs as he trips over a reed trap half finished. A mother hums to hush her baby, the tune curling into the river's hush. By dawn, the water will carry away the last drift of smoke, the last echo of doubt for now. But deep in the mud, secrets linger, waiting for the day they resurface like fish breaking the calm. A thin wisp of smoke curls from the central fire, carrying with it a tune older than the huts, older than the hush, binding each heart to the hush of mountains unseen. You drift toward the heart of the settlement, where voices gather low and steady. Tonight, they do not speak of raids or goats, but of ancestors whose bones rest far beyond these riverbanks, spirits who watch from mists, and stars judging each promise made in the flicker of the fire. Here, around the warmth, the people hum chants that twist through the reeds and drift across the sleeping water. A man with a voice like cracked bark begins the first line. His words roll in a tongue that makes children glance wide-eyed at their mother's syllables too old to match everyday chatter. Each line spills like a thread pulled from dusk's fabric and knotted at the edge of the circle. One by one, others join him, humming and swaying their palms, brushing dirt in slow, silent rhythms. Some say these songs were lifted from misty mountain paths, carried down by wandering kin who claimed the peaks still cradle their dead. Others insist they sprouted here, born beside the river's hush, stitched together by reed cutters and fishers who needed the promise of something bigger than firelight and goat pens. Surviving scraps of carved wood hint at symbols that might mark these songs, though scholars still squabble over whether the carvings were true lyrics or just charms against forgetting. You crouch near the edge of the circle, listening to the overlapping tones. A mother leans close to her daughter, whispering the verses line by line. The girl repeats each word, testing its weight on her tongue as the fire paints shadows across her cheeks. A boy nearby taps a flat stone with a stick in time to the rising chant, no drum, but the beat holds steady enough to stir goosebumps up your arms. A curious quirk flickers through this night's hush sometimes. When the singing drifts just right, a heron will step from the reeds drawn by the hum, or perhaps by fish startled by feet pounding the mud. Some elders swear the bird carries the song skyward, delivering them to misty peaks where stone spirits wait with patient ears. Others scoff, claiming the heron comes only for frogs and careless fish. Still, the chant weaves on low and patient. The voices tangle like smoke, carrying half-truths and old regrets. At the circle's edge, the chieftain's eyes close as he murmurs words that bind this fragile settlement to ghosts who might yet guard it from envy and hunger. The river hushes its own gossip for a heartbeat, listening perhaps, or simply waiting for secrets to drift downstream. Somewhere in the darkness, rival shadows pause to listen too. They hear the promise hidden in the hum. These people do not stand alone. Their roots sink deeper than reed huts and boundary stones. They have songs stitched to stars and misty hills, songs that promise tomorrow will remember where they came from. The chant fades when embers sag into the hush. One by one, voices fall away, leaving only the low croak of frogs and the hush of water weaving secrets through the night. You stand there wrapped in smoke and soft syllables, feeling how fragile stories can make mud walls stronger than stone. A single crow caws at dawn's edge, its cry slicing through the hush, where soft songs once curled, now replaced by the scrape of stone against earth. You drift through the early mist to where men and women kneel on damp soil sleeves, rolled hands, roughened by river silt. Here, the first boundary stones rise from mud like stubborn teeth, marking where one family's patch ends and another's begins. No grand wall, just lumps of river rock stacked and scraped with crude carvings that say this is ours in the hush of a world that still wants to claim it back. Each stone is hefted with a grunt, settled with care into the soft earth. Small twigs and dried reeds are wedged around the base to hold them steady until the mud hardens. Children hover at the edges, fingers tracing the simple scratches, symbols of goats, fish-woven mats, tiny sketches that say more than words ever could for now. Some scholars remain divided on whether these stones were true boundaries or sacred markers, tiny shrines where offerings of fish bones and plucked feathers whispered prayers that envy stay far away. A curious fragment uncovered years later, a smooth pebble with a swirl of red ochre, suggests they marked not just land, but the dream of dominion. The idea that people could plant their will in soil and call it unmovable. Near one stone, a father pulls his son close, guiding the boy's hand to carve a crude shape, a goat half recognizable, half hopeful. The boy frowns, tongue caught between his teeth, as he scratches the line deeper. He doesn't yet know that this single mark promises trouble as much as peace. For every boundary invites a test, every claim tempts a thief. At the river's bend, an elder stands apart, muttering blessings to the stones. Some say these whispered words were bribes to the river, asking it to respect these lines drawn by human hands. Others claim the old man was bargaining with shadows in the reeds, jealous cousins, rival clans, spirits with long memories and short patience. A woman places a basket of reeds near one stone, an odd little offering against mischief. It holds a fish head, a few crushed herbs, a curl of wool. Whether to feed spirits or to show goodwill to neighbors is anyone's guess. The hush holds both truths equally. You drift along the new line of stones, sensing the promise pressed into each crack. Here we stay. Here we plant fish traps, herd goats, tell stories that don't wander away with the smoke. But the river hums a sly counterpoint. Stones can sink, lines can blur, envy can slip through reed fences in the hush before dawn. A boy tosses a pebble across the line, testing teasing. His sister squeals, chasing him back toward the huts where the smell of morning fish soup drifts warm on the breeze. The stones stand silent behind them, unblinking witnesses to the soft beginning of borders and the quiet threats stitched into every claim. Overhead, the crow circles once more before drifting off toward the misty hills where more stones wait, where more secrets will settle into mud and hush, shaping the spine of a kingdom yet to come. A chill breeze ripples the river's surface cold enough to remind you that loyalty here must be proven not in words alone, but in ash and icy water under watchful eyes. You slip among the gathered circle where fresh-cut branches feed a crackling fire. Tonight is no simple song or hush of reeds. Tonight the tribe tests itself, each promise pressed like a palm against flame, each loyalty plunged where breath catches sharp in the chest. You stand at the edge as elders shape this new hush into trials that sting the skin and steel the spirit. First comes the fire. Young men and women stand barefoot on packed earth eyes fixed on a line of glowing coals. A hush drapes the crowd so quiet you swear you can hear each heartbeat echo in the hollow between sparks. One by one, they step souls pressing to heat breath, held tight. Some flinch, some stride steady, all carry the same lesson. Trust is no easy warmth. It scorches before it binds. Near the coals, a father murmurs old blessings into his daughter's hair as she waits her turn, half prayer, half promise, that the pain will pass quicker than fear can whisper doubts. Some say these trials were borrowed from older mountain clans, who walked fire not for spectacle, but to prove they were more flame than flesh, when unity demanded sacrifice. Surviving fragments of bone, charred in ritual pits, hint at this history, though researchers still argue whether the tribe forged its own rites or stitched them from scraps of older ways. When the coals cool, the hush shifts. They drift to the river's edge, where night wind bites and stars scatter cold light across the water. Here, loyalty slips under the skin in the shock of a plunge. Young shoulders tremble as they step knee-deep, waist-deep breath, a cloud in the hush. Elders line the bank arms, folded eyes sharp as flint watching for hesitation. One boy lingers on the bank toes, curled into mud heart, drumming thunder, loud enough for you to hear it in your ribs. His mother stands behind him, humming the same tune once crooned beside the first hut's clay wall. He breathes it in, then slips under river closing over the shape of his fear. A curious detail drifts down the hush of the river. Some say these tests were meant not to root out traitors, but to tangle the tribe's fate so tightly that to betray it would be to betray the pain carved into skin and bone. Others scoff, calling it primitive theater, to keep restless feet from wandering toward rival fires. As the last splashes quiet, the elders nod, satisfied that the hush of promise now grips each new heart, tight as a wet reed rope. Fire and water, burn and chill. It is not enough to gather around a warm hearth. These people must carry the scorch and sting inside them like flint, ready to spark when envy creeps too close. The tribe drifts back to the huts, wrapped in blankets, still damp with river ghosts. Feet still warm with coals. Breath still shallow from promises kept under starlight. Behind them, the river swallows the last ripples carrying secrets downstream, where tomorrow's shadows wait. You linger a moment longer by the coals, feeling the hush. They leave behind a hush that hums with the soft echo of feet on fire and lungs filled with river cold. A hush that says here, loyalty is more than a word. It's a scar, a shiver, a quiet promise pressed into skin and water alike. A raven perches on a boundary stone. At dawn, its croak cuts through the hush like a riddle, warning that no oath stands untested forever. You drift through the chill mist toward a tattered hide tent pitched just beyond the huts, close enough to hear the river's hush, but far enough that whispers slip easily into secrets. Inside sits the oracle, an old bone seer, whose eyes flicker like embers half buried in ash. Smoke curls from a clay bowl at her feet, carrying the sharp bite of burned herbs and marrow scraped from goat ribs. Families gather outside the tent in nervous clusters. Children tug at their mothers' sleeves, asking why they must wait in the cold, while a crooked old woman mutters to Bones. The mothers hush them with soft clucks, because this hush is different. This hush might decide if the huts stand tomorrow, or sink beneath envy and hunger. You slip into the tent unseen, where the bone seer crouches over her bowl. She turns bleached slivers of rib and knuckle in the smoke, mumbling names you've never heard. The bones clack like dry teeth. Some say she was once a wanderer who heard the river speak in dreams. Others claim she's older than the tribe itself, a leftover from the misty mountains who carried secrets stitched into her flesh. Surviving fragments of oral stories speak of her warnings, how she foretold ruin if the people's gratitude turned sour, if greed outgrew fish traps and reed huts. Scholars remain divided. Was she a true oracle or just a clever elder, weaving fear into loyalty? A curious footnote in an old carving shows a crooked figure surrounded by fish and flames. Some read it as the bone seer, whispering caution, others as a symbol of how fragile fire and water can be when envy flickers at the edge. Inside the tent, a girl kneels, eyes wide breath, trembling like a reed in wind. She watches the old woman's hands dance in the smoke, each bone twist a sign she cannot read, but feels anyway, in the pit of her belly. A mother waits at the entrance, chewing her lip, raw, hoping the bones rattle out a promise of fat goats and quiet nights. The oracle's voice cracks through the hush. She speaks of ruin that creeps in when the fire burns too bright for gratitude to keep pace. She speaks of rivers that rise to swallow ungrateful dwellings. She tells them envy feeds on warm huts more eagerly than any rival clan. Beyond the tent, the tribe shifts uneasily. Some roll eyes muttering that the old crone smells more of smoke than truth. Others clutch their children closer, whispering fresh prayers to the reeds and stones promises that tonight they'll drop another offering into the hush where the river listens. You hover near the bones a moment longer, feeling the chill they carry, a riddle clacking in the dark, a hush that says even the warmest fire can burn a kingdom hollow if greed feeds the flame. Outside, the raven lifts from the stone wings, slicing the hush open wide, before fading into the misty trees, carrying the warning to where new shadows gather, waiting to see if these whispered promises hold. A hush drapes the clearing like a heavy blanket, thicker than mist, thicker than fear, woven from rumors that drifted far beyond the river's bend. You stand where smoke from the first huts curls into the sky, a faint banner that reaches distant valleys and rival hills. Tonight shapes move through the dusk that don't belong to the soft songs or gentle trials. Chiefs from far-flung clans gather at the settlement's edge, faces lined with old rivalries and new questions, eyes sharp as flint behind painted smiles. They arrive in small clusters, goats tied to thorny branches, offerings of dried fish, and woven mats carried on bent backs. Their footsteps drum quiet warnings into the earth. We see you. We hear the hush of your fire. We wonder how strong it really burns. Around them, children peer from behind reed walls, giggling until their mothers hush them back into shadows. Near the main fire, the first chieftain waits not on a throne, but on the same rough log that smells of ash and damp wool. His fur cloak drapes loose across shoulders, made broad by more nights under stars than under a roof. When he stands, the hush deepens a river of silence where words hold weight heavier than any spear. Some say this gathering of chiefs was pure legend, no surviving carvings, record names or faces, only broken bits of antler beads and half-burned fire pits hinting at a council that crackled hotter than any hearth. Scholars still argue whether these leaders came to strike a pact or to sniff out weakness, weighing whether this rising tribe's warmth might spread too far too fast. A curious detail sticks in the stories. One visiting chief tied a carved wolf fang into the first chieftain's cloak. Some say a sign of respect. Others, a threat, a sly promise that teeth wait where trust falters. The fang, it's whispered, was found seasons later buried beneath a boundary stone, its edge worn smooth by mud and time. You drift among the gathered leaders, listening as they trade words, like sharpened fish hooks, polite, careful, hungry for slip-ups. They ask how many goats bleat behind reed fences, how deep the fish traps run, how wide the hush spreads when raiders test the shadows. Each answer is a stone added to a pile that might build trust or bury it. Near the fire's edge, a young boy listens with wide eyes, tugging at his father's sleeve every time a voice rises or a laugh drips honey over hidden blades. He sees the way words cut softer than knives, how promises can hold poison, sweeter than any river fish. One elder watches from the shadows, head bowed low, murmuring a song under his breath, an old chant that binds the hush to older hills, where rival fires once flickered the same way. He knows these chiefs have come to weigh a rising threat, but might leave with seeds of alliance tucked under their cloaks if only the hush holds. Somewhere in the dark, a goat bleats sharp thin, a reminder that for all the smoke and carved fangs and soft promises, hunger and envy still circle these fragile huts like wolves at dusk. You drift back from the flicker of flame, feeling the hush stretch tight over the gathering. Every word, every nod, every half smile, another reed woven into a basket strong enough to hold a kingdom's promise. Or leak it all away if even one stalk breaks. A fat drop of rain splashes onto an empty clay cup. Tiny drumbeat, warning that what begins in feasting can end in blades drawn under woolen cloaks. You slip closer to the fire circle that tonight swells twice its usual size. Fresh logs crackle bright, casting long shadows that dance over woven mats and baskets piled with dried fish, smoked meat, and half-sour berries. The chiefs from distant clans squat shoulder to shoulder with the river people, lips slick with fat eyes, glittering like knives hidden in soft reeds. Laughter floats up into the hush-throaty sticky with the warmth of fermented drink ladled from cracked gourds. A young boy carries a bowl twice his head size from guest to guest, his bare feet slipping in spilled broth. He tries not to giggle when one chief pats his hair and slips him a tiny copper bead, a hush payment, to keep certain secrets safe. Somewhere in the shadows behind the fire, two women lean close, weaving reeds as they trade gossip. Who plans to gift goats, who hints at stolen ones, who offers a bride as a bond tighter than any fish trap's twine. Their whispers coil like smoke, half blessing, half bait. Surviving shards of charred pottery uncovered near old hearths hint at these early feasts. Fish bones and tiny copper scales mixed in the ash proof that words once wove alliances as easily as they frayed them. Scholars remain tangled in debate. Did these feasts truly unite rival clans? Or were they honeyed traps to sniff out who might betray the hush when the coals burned low? The rain thickens, pattering onto shoulders, mingling with laughter and spilt drink. A chieftain rises, lifting a skin of wine, high voice rolling out like distant thunder. He toasts the river, the goats the hush, that binds them all tighter than fear alone ever could. The crowd echoes him in ragged cheers, some earnest, some clinging to carved knives hidden in belt folds. Near the log, where the first chieftain sits, a young rival leans close, too close for comfort, his grin all teeth and damp promises. He whispers something that makes the chieftain's eyes flicker, hand tightening on the drinking cup, like it might shatter in his palm. A curious detail drifts through old tales. One carved wolf fang, the same one tied into a fur cloak. Seasons ago, reappears tonight, tucked inside a wineskin as a warning or perhaps a reminder that alliances taste sweetest when dipped in threat. Somewhere behind the circle, shadows flicker, two figures slip away from the fire's reach. Feet silent on damp earth, cloaks pulled tight against the hiss of rain. Their hush is not the hush of unity, but the hush of blades pressed to ribs, secrets traded for tomorrow's stolen dawn. Inside the ring of flickering warmth, a child curls beside a basket of reeds, drifting to sleep on the lull of voices that promise peace even as the river listens for the splash of betrayal. The feast hums on honeyed words, masking bitter edges, laughter covering the quick flash of a knife hidden in a fold of wool. Rain patters steady, drumming out the heartbeat of a hush that holds for now, but slips like wet reeds if hands grow too greedy. A thin wail of wind slides through the huts, long and low, carrying the hush of feet that flee faster than trust can stitch the night back together. You drift behind the last shadows, slipping from the fire circle's ruin. Where laughter once tangled with the pop of fat on coals, silence now hisses, broken only by the crunch of hurried steps through wet reeds. The rightful heir, a youth barely old enough to shoulder his father's fur cloak, runs ahead of those who would slice his name from memory like a goat's throat under moonlight. His breath clouds the chill air, a torch clutched in one trembling hand. It flickers wild, tossing gold light onto branches that claw at his face. Behind him, a handful of loyal ones slog through the underbrush, bare feet slapping mud, the hush of the river swallowed by the rush of heartbeats that hammer louder than any hunting horn. Some say the betrayal came with poisoned wine passed hand to hand until it found the heir's father's lips. Others whisper of a knife slipped under fur cloaks when laughter rose loudest. Scholars still bicker over scraps of bone blades and a single cracked drinking cup unearthed from the old feast grounds, each relic an echo that hints but never confirms. A curious bit of gossip flickers through old tales. A trader's cloak was found snagged on a bramble bush where the torchlight first splashed its orange fear onto the night. Some claim it was kept by the exiles tucked into a hidden shrine as a reminder that betrayal walks always a step behind trust. You drift with them now, through marsh shadows where frogs hush at the slap of feet, through tangles of low branches that scratch like thin knives. The torchlight dances on wet bark, guiding them deeper into trees that swallow the hush of pursuit. A child stumbles sobbing once before a strong hand lifts him onto a broad back. Another hush, this one softer, stitched with whispered promises that tomorrow they'll rest, tomorrow they'll be safe. Behind the rival clans, huddle around the smoldering fire circle knives, still damp words hushed with triumph that taste sourer than the wine that dripped from cracked skins. They watch the tree line, but none dare follow. Yet fearful, the forest swallows, not just exiles, but secrets that slither back hungry for revenge. Near the torch's trembling flame, the young heir's eyes glint with something too sharp for his years. Mud cakes his shins. His breath comes ragged, but the hush he carries now is thicker than any goat's bleat or river's gossip. It hums with the shape of a vow they may take the fire, the goats, the reed huts, but not the bones of a promise too stubborn to drown. You drift with them a little longer, deeper into the hush, where shadows slip between trunks like ghosts. The torch sputters as rain drips from branches, but a hand shields it, one small flame, to carry the hush of a kingdom not yet broken beyond mending. A hush like damp wool settles over the hidden valley, thicker than the smoke of old fires, softer than the secrets carried here by feet blistered from flight. You stand on the slope above where the exiles have stopped at last, tucked between folds of low hills and bristly goat paths, so narrow even whispers struggle to slip through. The young heir, fur cloak torn and torch-long snuffed, crouches in the cold dawn, fingers pressed to rocky soil that promises little and yet everything all at once. They unpack what few bundles survived the flight baskets of dried fish scraps of smoked meat, a cracked gourd of stale wine. At the valley's edge, goats graze between thorn bushes, their soft bleats threading the hush with a promise of milk and warmth. The people move slowly, backs bent from nights without sleep, eyes darting to every rustle in the reeds that line a thin trickle of water. Somewhere near the stream, a woman drives stakes into the wet ground, lashing reeds into a rough pen for the goats. A boy gathers stones for a new fire pit, hands blue with chill but steady. He hums under his breath, snatches of the same ancestor song once sung beside the river's hush. Even here, the tune drifts, tying this hidden hollow to stories older than any crown. Historians remain divided over how these exiles found the valley. Some say a wandering herder led them here in exchange for a promise that his children would eat beside theirs when the goats fattened. Others claim a bone seer's final whisper shaped their path through the misty uplands, a curious scrap of bark found near the valley's edge, marked with crude symbols for goat and mountain hints, at a map drawn in desperation, tucked into a wool tunic when the fire circle turned traitor. The hush here is different. It holds the slap of goat hooves, the scrape of stone knives on saplings, the hush of words spoken low, so the wind won't carry them back to rival ears. Each reed mat, laid on damp ground, says, "Here we heal, here we watch, here we wait." Near a low boulder that acts as a table, the young heir sits cross-legged, a goat kid, nuzzling at his side for warmth. He murmurs to an elder plans half-shaped from dreams and scraps of old vows. No one dares say the word kingdom yet. The hush bristles at such arrogance. But the promise hums all the same, stitched into each goat's bleat, and each whispered oath betrayal cut us loose, but it will not cut us down. A child dozes wrapped in a tattered cloak beside a pile of bundled reeds. Soft snoring drifts into the hush, a reminder that even hunted dreams need sleep. The first fire in this hidden valley flickers to life, a timid flame that crackles against the damp like a heartbeat too stubborn to hush. You drift above them, feeling the hush thicken, with every goat herded closer to the pen, every reed tied into shelter, every secret traded beneath the cloak of mist. Here, in this hidden pocket, where the wind carries no gossip, they tend goats and grudges alike, mending trust with calloused hands and whispered vows that tomorrow will belong to those too stubborn to vanish. A sharp gust from the peaks brushes the valley floor cool and thin. It carries the hush of ancient stones and vows too heavy to slip from memory. You drift along a narrow goat trail, winding up the hills behind the hidden settlement. There, under the ghost-gray dawn, the exiles climb toward a ridge where the wind combs secrets through low grasses and cracked stones. Their footsteps crunch against frost and loose pebbles, every step a soft promise that fear can be swallowed by higher ground. At the front of the line, the young heir walks with shoulders squared beneath a fur cloak mended too many times to count. In his hand, a slim staff carved from river driftwood, a relic of the first fire circle now bleached by sun and the hush of flight. Each step up the stony spine is like pressing a bruise pane, reminding him how fragile loyalty becomes when knives slip under woolen cloaks. At the summit, a ring of stones waits. Some claim they were set there by ancestors whose chants once tangled with the cold wind. Others swear the stones grew from the mountain's ribs, summoned by whispered vows and the hush of old grief. Surviving scraps of weathered bone beads, found buried among the stones, fuel the debate. Scholars remain divided whether they mark burial sites or places where oaths crack the sky open. You hover among them now as they gather in the hush between frost and dawn. The young heir stands in the circle's heart, bare feet, pressed to frozen earth. Around him, the last loyal exiles clutch hands, their breath rising in white threads that knot together in the chill. A curious detail flickers at the edge of this vow. One child holds a goat kid, its soft bleat swallowed by the hush, as if the animal, too, listens for promises older than any crown. Some whisper that a single strand of goat wool burned in the stone ring that morning bound the vow to something wilder than men, something mountain-blooded, river-boned. The young heir speaks, his voice cracked, but steady, carving the hush into shape. He promises that this time no betrayal will slip between them. No blade will find its mark beneath a fur cloak without every heart here feeling its sting. He swears that kinship will hold where envy failed. That trust, once broken, will now be hammered to iron on the cold anvil of these peaks. They answer him with murmured words, rough, half lost in the wind, but enough to knot a new hush around them. Each oath tumbles from chapped lips, like warm breath caught and frozen by the dawn. Some repeat old ancestor chants, others craft new lines on the spot, every word a stone pressed into the circle, every promise a frost-brittle shield against the hungry dark below. You linger with them as the first light catches on the stone ring, painting the vow in gold and soft shadows. Below, the hidden valley curls in on itself like a secret waiting for the right season to wake. And here, on this peak, with wind and stones and stubborn hearts to witness it, the hush sharpens from a refuge into a quiet edge, a vow that betrayal may cut once but never twice. A thin drift of dawn mist slips down the peak, wrapping each promise in hush and frost, as the exiles descend with new symbols stitched to their sleeves. You drift at the edge of their return, watching as they slip back into the valley like ghosts grown stubbornly solid again. On bent knees beside flickering coals, women pull wolf pelts from rough packs, coats traded for root vegetables, and secret safe passage from wandering hill clans. The fur smells of rain and musk threads of wilderness now sewn tight into the hush of a people who refuse to vanish. A boy sits cross-legged near the goats, a needle of bone clutched in raw fingers. He pierces hide and cloth in careful loops, binding scraps of pelt to a scrap of woven reed mat. An odd mix, but it works. At the center, a swirl of old colors dyed from crushed berries stains the hide, dark a remnant of the ancestral marks first smeared on faces when the river still whispered only to drifting fishermen. Somewhere near the reed pens, an elder hums an old chant as she knots thin cords through the pelts, binding wolf fur to river colors, tying betrayal's wound to loyalty's scar. She pauses sometimes to sniff the hide eyes half closed, as if scent alone carries the hush of all that's come before. When she's done, she presses each new banner into young hands, with a nod that says, "Hold this tighter than you hold your doubts." Surviving scraps of these first banners live only as frayed threads and half-fossilized fur pressed between stones on windswept ridges. Historians disagree whether they were battle flags or just talismans stitched to remind each exile that they were bound together by more than fear. A curious detail emerges in folk songs. Some say a single wolf pelt always draped the heir's shoulders during secret councils, the fur a whisper that no predator hunts forever without meeting teeth of its own. By the fire, the young heir tests the new banner, wrapping it tight around his forearm before lifting it to the hush of the valley. His breath clouds as he speaks no grand speech, just a promise that from this fur and color will rise not just a clan reborn, but a hush too stubborn for envy to gut again. Children press close eyes, wide fingers, brushing the soft edges of the wolf fur. They giggle when the air drapes it over their heads, the pelt's tail tickling their muddy shins. They do not yet grasp the weight stitched into these scraps, but they'll carry it anyway, one small oath at a time. Somewhere a goat coughs in the hush, a bristly reminder that hunger still circles like an old rival, waiting for the embers to fade. But tonight, the new banner flutters above rough shelters, fur rustling in mountain wind, ancestral colors, catching what little sun the valley allows. You drift back as the hush curls tight around the exiles. Wolf fur berry dye, and old stories knotted into symbols that promise our old blood binds us, our new blood dares to return. A hawk wheels above the valley at dawn. Its cry pierces the hush, a sharp promise that what was taken will one night return quiet and certain as breath. You drift with the exiles now, as they creep from their hidden hollow, like mist spilling down goat paths at first light. There is no roaring drumbeat, no clash of iron, just whispers traded over shared grain and warm coals, words that slip through hedgerows and drift into rival huts where hunger yawns wide and old grudges soften under the hush of a fair promise. They move in twos and threes, their new banners tucked beneath plain cloaks, wolf fur, hidden until the hush proves safe. At village edges, they greet farmers, bent over thin fields, hands blistered from digging stones from stingy soil. A single pelt flashes in firelight as bread and salted fish change hands, small gifts, small nods. The promise hums, stand with us, eat with us, and envy's bite will pass you by. Near a river bend, where reeds grow thick, a woman kneels in the mud with 2 fish traps and a shy grin. She listens as the exile's messenger, once a boy who tripped on goat hooves, now grown to speak in hush and secrets, spins tales of fair harvests, no stolen goats, no hidden knives. She glances at the traps, then at her skinny child perched on her hip. Her nod says enough. Another hush binds another family to the promise of return. Scholars still squabble over these quiet alliances. Some claim the exiles bribed the hungry with stolen grain. Others insist it was kinship frayed, but never truly severed, that stitched the hush back together. A curious detail hides in old songs, verses that speak of grain folded in wolf fur, passed in secret beneath baskets of rushes, to prove that bread, not blades, might carry this hush home. The rightful heir walks among these shadows, 2 fur cloak trimmed tight to his shoulders, ancestral colors hidden beneath plain wool. At night, he squats by fires too small to betray smoke to the wrong eyes. He speaks softly, voice raw, from mountain winds, and betrayal's sour taste. He reminds each new ally that envy once stole their goats, stole their warmth. Now they might take it back with trust and grain shared at dawn, not blood spilled in midnight's hush. A boy squats by an elder's knee as the new pact is murmured. He pokes at the fire with a stick, eyes wide, when he sees the flicker of wolf pelt under a cloak's fold. He whispers a question too soft for most to hear, but the elder nods. Yes, we come back. Yes, the hush holds. Yes, the old wrong will break under harvest's weight. You drift through hedgerows and half-built fences, through flickers of hope tucked in clay jars and reed baskets. One by one, allies gather where the hush hums strongest. They share stories over coals that spark tiny dreams of smoke rising again, this time over huts that stand unbroken by envy's bite. Somewhere in the dark, rival clans watch from a distance, eyes narrowed, ears straining to catch the hush. They hear the quiet promise rustle through fields and fish traps alike fairness, where there was greed, grain, where there was theft, a hearth that burns envy to ash. And you stand with them breath tight in the hush that thickens like smoke before a storm ready to slip back into the place where all this began. A harvest moon rises fat and low, casting a cold silver hush over fields that once hid only whispers. Tonight blades flash where grain once grew. You drift along the edge of a clearing, where the exiles gather under dark cloaks, stitched with wolf fur and berry-dyed cords. No war drums thump the hush awake, just the soft scrape of sharpened flint against flint, the hiss of breath held tight between cracked lips. Their blades rough and mismatched glint beneath the moon, as if daring envy to blink first. Near the front, the young heir stands barefoot in the brittle grass cloak thrown back so the wolf pelt catches the moonlight. His shadow stretches behind him, taller than any crown, broader than any throne carved from driftwood and wishful songs. He does not speak tonight. His hush is enough. Around him, the lost ones nod, shoulders, squared feet, planted like boundary stones that envy can't budge. Somewhere beyond the clearing, rival scouts whisper warnings back to those who thought the betrayal had burned this kin down to ash. They watch the hush gather its teeth and flex its old bones. They see the glint of fish hooks hammered into crude blades, the glimmer of copper coins sewn to wolf pelts, scraps of trade turned to armor for hearts that refuse to scatter again. Historians argue whether this clash truly unfolded under a harvest moon. Some fragments of dulled blades unearthed from nearby gullies hint at a fight more muddled, more drawn out than folk songs claim. But the stories hold firm moonlight, silvered the hush, so each blow struck felt like striking back at every stolen goat, every whispered lie that splintered kin into shadows. A curious detail flickers through those old tales. One child too young to swing a blade carried a basket of smooth stones up and down the moonlit lines, offering them to fighters when hands trembled or blades slipped in blood-slick grass. Some say he grew to guard the new kingdom's granaries forever, a keeper of hush made strong by small, stubborn offerings. You hover near the first clash, a quick rustle, a grunt swallowed by reeds, then the sharp ring of flint on bone. The hush that once stitched fire circles and river songs now hums through every heartbeat on this field. There are no war cries, only breath, only the slap of feet through harvest stubble, only the cold hush of the moon watching without pity. At the rear, women huddle with goats, tethered close, whispering chants that braid the hush tighter than any iron chain. Their eyes flick to the moon, to the bent shape of the first chieftain's fur draped across young shoulders, to the thin line of shadows that slip between rows of corn and spear tips. Somewhere, a rival drops his blade into the hush and flees toward the river's bend, knowing the hush will follow soft and patient as frost on reeds. The exiles press forward, breath steaming in the moonlight blades, lifted with every promise ever broken by envy's bite, and you drift among them, listening to the hush crackle like dry reeds underfoot, soft but unyielding, the quiet edge of a kingdom rising where once only smoke and goat bleats dared to gather. A crow screams, at first light sharp, and ragged its echo, shredding the hush that clings to dawn's breath, where the last clash settles into silence. You drift along the edge of the field, where bent stalks and churned mud mark where blades met under the harvest moon. Now, in the gray hush that follows, The storm shadows huddle on their knees, hands bound with fresh-cut reeds that still drip with night's chill. They do not wail. They do not beg. Their hush is brittle as frost held tight between clenched jaws that once boasted of easy raids and stolen goats. At the front stands the young heir, wolf pelt pulled snug against his shoulders, berry-dyed cords knotted at his throat like old oaths made visible. He does not gloat. He does not grin. He watches the bound rivals through the hush, his breath slow and steady as if testing whether victory tastes better when the sun finally shows its bruised face. Somewhere near the river's bend, elders stand guard goats, tethered behind them, bleeding softly as dawn spills across churned fields. They murmur low words to children who hover wide-eyed behind reed baskets. Remember this hush. Remember envy's price. Remember how easily trust can splinter under soft moonlight. Surviving scraps of rusted reed cords found in mud near ancient boundary stones hint at this moment, though scholars still squabble whether the surrender was as clean as songs claim. Some argue the rivals were offered fish and grain for loyalty, that dawn others insist sharpened blades pressed hush against throats until heads bowed low by river's edge. A curious fragment threads through folk tales. The bound ones were made to wash their hands in the cold shallows before the first sun slipped past the tree line. River water, they said, could carry shame away, quicker than envy ever learned to swim. Near the fires that flicker back to life, women carry baskets of dried herbs, sprinkling them on coals, so the hush smells sweeter than last night's fear. Children gather reeds and old goat hides to wrap the shivering prisoners, proof that this new hush, this rising spine of a kingdom, would build walls wide enough to hold mercy too. A boy tugs at the young heir's cloak, whispering if the bound ones will be fed. The heir kneels eyes level with the child's, and nods once, no great speech. Just the hush of promise, loyalty holds where envy yields. Grain grows where knives dull. You drift along the line of bowed heads, the hush thick with breath that turns to mist and promise. For now, the old rivals yield hands, bound with reeds, soft enough to break, if envy dares return strong enough to remind them dawn's hush holds sharper teeth than any wolf's grin. Somewhere the crow lifts from a fence post, wings beating out a promise of tomorrow's hush, one not yet broken by envy's whispered threat. Mist curls along the tree line as the hush of surrender gives way to the soft shuffle of feet, gathering where dawn's pale light cracks over a kingdom's first crown. You drift beside them as they climb a gentle rise above the river, bare feet sinking into dew-wet grass. Here at the crest, the hush folds itself around a circle of figures, kneeling in mud, still scented with last night's clash. In the center stands the young heir, no longer just an exile, no longer just the echo of a broken promise, but the hush given shape in fur cord and breath warmed by trust. There is no throne, no carved stone to lift him high above the people who share this hush. Instead, an elder steps forward, hands cupped around a simple crown, woven twigs, thin strips of bark, a few copper coins hammered flat and threaded through the weave so the sunrise winks off metal soft as river light. A crown born not from gold or envy, but from hands that once dug mud for huts and mended goat pens under drifting smoke. Surviving scraps of those early coins, tarnished and bent surface now and then, near riverbeds and old boundary stones, tiny tokens that scholars pore over arguing whether they mark a coronation or just trade gone grand. Folk songs, though, hold tight to the hush of this dawn, the breathless moment when hush itself rested on young brows and turned exile into ruler. A curious quirk lingers in one tale. The crown's base, they say, was lined with a tuft of goat hair, proof that even now the beasts who fed the hush with milk and meat carried its weight on their soft shoulders. Some whisper it was a promise that the new ruler would never forget the valley's low bleats or the stolen goats that first tested trust. You hover close as the elder places the crown. The young man bows his head, a hush of breath slipping from cracked lips that once whispered escape plans beneath tangled branches. No speech, no roar, just a quiet vow pressed into the hush between him and every pair of eyes that meet his one heartbeat stitched to another, until envy's bite dulls against a wall built of river reeds, wolf fur, and trust bound tighter than any reed cord. Children squirm near the circle's edge, their giggles a bright break in the hush. One boy tries to touch the crown's copper coin before his mother pulls him back with a soft laugh, proof that no crown stands taller than the hush of kinship that props it up. The first light spills across, faces turn to the dawn smoke from the valley's fresh fires curling behind them like a banner woven from new hope and old secrets. Below, goats scatter between huts that cling to the river's edge, their bleats winding through reed fences that once split kin, but now hold them close. And you drift with them, over crown, over bent heads, over a hush that dares to bind tomorrow to roots sunk deep in muddy banks. For tonight, for this breath, envy lies quiet, and the hush wears a crown woven from everything it could not burn. Thin threads of dawn smoke drift toward the pale sky, carrying the hush of a promise that stone once laid in prayer might bind this new crown tighter than any blade ever could. You drift along a worn path where bare feet drag small, uneven trenches into damp earth. At the far edge of the settlement, just beyond the first huts and reed pens, a circle of figures kneels in the hush palms, pressed flat to cold stones that catch the weak warmth of the rising sun. They hum the same ancestor tune once traded beside the river's hush, a chant softer now folded into the promise of these new stones. At the center, a rough rectangle of freshly laid rocks rises knee-high from the churned soil. There is no marble, no grand carving, just river stones, clay packed into gaps by calloused fingers still raw from lifting boundary markers and mending goat fences. A boy dips a clay bowl into the shallows nearby, dribbling cold water over each stone so the hush hums like wet river reeds. Historians squint at the ruins of these early temple foundations, half buried beneath modern fields, scattered coins and scorched pebbles caught in tree roots and plow blades. Some claim the stones form the spine of a sacred hall where chants grew louder than envy's hiss. Others insist it was nothing more than a communal hearth shelter for stories to gather where wind and rain could not steal them away. Surviving scraps argue both ways: a cracked reed flute found between the stones, a bone charm carved with fish scales tucked deep under a corner slab. A curious detail flits through old tales. Goats were led through the stone circle at dawn, their hooves clacking over cold rock. Not for sacrifice, these were not people given to blood offerings, but as living prayers, small walking bundles of warmth and milk proof that trust fed both belly and spirit. You hover near the young heir as he kneels to press his palm to the first foundation stone. His wolf cloak drapes muddy grass, berry-dyed cords catching flecks of wet clay. He closes his eyes, and though his breath forms no grand vow, the hush around him hums with a promise. Walls may crack, envy may creep, but these stones will remember what smoke and goat fences first bound together. Children watch from the edges, fingers tucked into mother's sleeves. One girl creeps close enough to tap the wet stones with a stick, testing whether they hum back. They do not, but the hush they cradle soaks into her giggle anyway, carried off by the morning wind that teases sparks from the village's new hearths. Above, smoke drifts toward dawn's pale belly, threading prayers through crisp air. Each stone says, "Stay." Each prayer says, "Hold." Each bleat of a tethered goat says, "Feed us so we do not drift again." And you drift too, above the low walls, not yet grown into temple towers, listening to the hush that binds stone and promise goat and crown. Here under new sun and soft chanting envy finds no corner to hide that the hush cannot root out stone by humble stone. A crow circles above the stone walls at dusk, its cry scraping the hush thin as the first hammer strike carves promises into cold rock. You drift close, where the chisel bites a sharp, steady knock, echoing through the hush of new temple walls, not yet roofed, but already heavy with whispered vows. Here beside the river's slow curve, the people gather in small knots, fingers tracing fresh marks cut into slabs the same color as the mud that once clung to their reed huts. Near the front, the young ruler stands bareheaded under a sky bruised with late sunset. Wolf fur drapes his shoulders, berry cords bind his wrists with the hush of loyalty knotted tight as any boundary rope. He watches an elder lean over the first stone tablet, mouth moving with each word, chiseled taxes of grain weighed in woven baskets, oaths of loyalty murmured at dawn's hush and dusk's hush alike, punishments for envy that sneaks between goats and fire circles. Surviving shards of these early edicts still surface, now and then, slabs cracked by frost lines, half faded under centuries of river silt. Scholars bicker over the words. Some claim the rules were simple tithes to keep the temple fed. Others swear they stitched hush to every corner of the new kingdom, binding each tongue to the promise that envy's bite would snap dull against carved stone. A curious detail flickers in an old folk verse. For every law carved under moonlight, the people left a handful of grain beside the temple's stones, small bribes for shadows and river spirits alike, so the hush could settle without needing iron blades at every door. Children squat in the dirt near the stone carvers, eyes wide as the chisel pecks out words older than any goat's bleat. One boy pokes his sister in the ribs each time a flake of stone leaps free, giggling like each letter might squeal if tickled too hard. Behind them, a mother hums the ancestor tune under her breath, old songs slipping between new rules like reeds through river currents. As dusk deepens, fires spark along the temple's edge. Fish sizzle on flat stones, the smell tangling with smoke and the hush of half-heard promises. A father leans close to his son, pointing at the fresh lines etched in the stone. See this. Here is where your goats become more than goats. Here is where envy finds no crack to slither through. The young ruler runs a palm over the damp stone breath, curling into the night. No crown tonight, just bare skin pressed to fresh-cut words that promise the hush will hold through thin harvests and thick envy alike. And you drift beside the chisel's echo, through smoke, through children's giggles, through the hush that sinks into each groove cut under torchlight. One line at a time, a kingdom rises, not just of wolf fur and copper coins, but of hush pinned down in stone, so envy must wait outside, hungry but kept at bay. A cold wind slithers through the stone walls at dawn, carrying with it the bitter hush of empty baskets and fields cracked under a sky that forgets to rain. You drift among the people now as they gather near the temple stones, eyes hollow, where once the hush held warm promises and full bellies. The goats bleat restlessly in their pens, ribs pressing sharp against winter coats. A woman kneels at the river's edge, sifting silt through trembling fingers, hoping for fish that slipped away seasons ago when the water ran fat and sweet. They call it the hunger hush, a silence so deep, even the ancestor songs falter under its weight. Fires shrink to thin embers, fed more by dry reeds than goat fat or grain. Children poke at cold coals with sticks, whispering half-remembered chants about mountains and rivers that once promised more than the dry sky gives now. Near the temple wall, the young ruler stands barefoot in churned mud-wolf fur, dragging at his shoulders like a memory too heavy to burn. The laws still glint on cold stones, taxes of grain oaths, of loyalty, punishments for envy. But now, grain hides in secret pits, goats vanish under midnight cloaks, and envy sharpens its teeth where hunger gnaws first. Some historians argue this blight was just one lean harvest, folded into myth by storytellers desperate to make hunger feel holy. Others swear the famine cracked the new kingdom's hush wide open, letting shadows slip in through empty bowls and smoke-thin promises. They point to bone shards buried beside abandoned goat pens, half-burned reed mats caught in river mud, proof that trust strains under the hush when bread does not come. A curious detail curls through an old chant. When the famine clamped jaws tight, the people left tiny braids of goat hair on the temple stones offerings. Some say to remind the hush that its strength was stitched not only in stone and fur, but in stomachs filled enough to dream tomorrow. By the hearths small and mean, now a mother hushes her child's whimpers, promising that next dawn will bring grain from distant valleys. Fair trade for the last copper coins hammered into the crown seasons ago. A father lifts a reed basket, tipping it to show more dust than grain. His laugh drifts brittle through the hush, half joke, half plea, that envy not creep inside when hunger slips through every fence. And you drift among them over cracked fields, empty fish traps, stones that remember oaths carved bright when bellies were full. This hush holds for now, soft and stubborn, wrapped around each rib, like the memory of warm smoke and goat milk. But envy scratches at the door, thin, patient, waiting for the hush to crack, just wide enough to slither back in where bread will not. A thin drizzle rattles the reed roofs, gentle, hesitant, a hush that hints the sky might forgive, if only for a season's breath. You drift beside the people gathered around fresh baskets laid open under the leaking sky. Each drop that taps a hollow gourd feels like an answered prayer, stitched from cracked lips, and whispers traded through nights when hunger pressed bones too close to skin. Where envy once prowled hope now creeps back and timid as a goat kid poking its nose into an old pen, sniffing for grain that might yet fill it. Near the temple stones, the young ruler stands under the wolf pelt, now darkened by drizzle. His berry-dyed cords hang limp in the damp, but his grin flickers like the first dry spark coaxed from wet tinder. Around him, traders squat low over reed mats spread with trinkets from distant valleys. Rough salt, smoked river fish, jars sealed tight with wax to keep the hush of famine from slipping in again. Some claim this fragile festival bloomed from cunning deals struck behind stone walls, packs of grain for copperfish, for promises that the hush would hold its breath just a little longer. Others argue luck drifted in on the backs of wandering herders' packs, heavy with root vegetables traded for a share in the hush that even hunger could not swallow whole. Children scamper under the half-built shelter, strung beside the temple's shadow, squealing when drizzle drips down their necks. A boy dangles a string of dried berries above his sister's open mouth, each drop of juice a promise that winter's lean belly might plump just enough for songs to find their tune again. A curious scrap of bone unearthed near these festival grounds bears a scratch of a goat, a fish, and a single bent reed cymbals woven through folk tales that say, this hush found its second breath, not through knives or coins, but through hands that traded envy for baskets of bread and a promise to share the next catch before envy could sniff it out. You hover close as small fires hiss under damp wood, their smoke curling through the hush like a second skin. Elders chant old songs over steaming fish pots, the same songs once hummed beside cold coals when nights felt longer than the river's bend. One mother lifts her child onto her hip palm, pressed to the warm stones of the temple wall. She whispers a vow that next season the hush will hold steady, no goats stolen in the night, no grain hidden under loose thatch, no envy finding cracks between families who stand shoulder to shoulder when the drizzle turns to downpour. And you drift above it, all over fish, traded for trust, over baskets lined with fresh herbs, over the hush that breathes easier tonight. Rain taps the reed roofs like a drum too soft for envy to drown out. A hush that once tasted of ash now tastes of mint and rootfish oil and cautious laughter, fragile but alive enough to grow. A hush deeper than river fog settles over the valley, soft and wide, stitched together by stories half true and fully believed passed from tongue to tongue until even envy grows drowsy beneath its weight. You drift far above now, where the new huts squat, sturdy beside boundary stones, once fresh and bright, now moss-crowned and half-sunk, but unforgotten. Goat pens hum with low bleats. Children's laughter leaks through reed fences that once bristled with suspicion, and the temple walls catch morning sun on carvings dulled by wind and candle smoke. Inside, elders kneel, where chants still coil up into roof beams, darkened by seasons of worry and feasting alike. They teach young ones the names of those who fled with a single torch, who slept in hidden hollows, who bound envy with wolf fur and berry dye, and boundary stones carved with more hope than any spear could promise. Somewhere behind the temple, a woman draws her finger through mud softened by last night's rain, sketching the swirl of a banner wolf fur, old colors river curves. A boy watches eyes wide mouth, shaped into questions half formed. His father leans close, murmuring how the hush first took root in whispered promises beside a drifting fire circle no bigger than a goat pen. Surviving scraps, frayed cords, a single copper coin rubbed faceless by countless palms, lie hidden under floorboards or pressed into mud walls talismans for hush that hums beneath floor reeds when winter tries to sneak envy back through the cracks. A curious sliver of song threads through every telling that what was once a stolen goat became a crown woven of twigs and copper. That fire circles drew shadows together not for warmth alone, but for stories that stuck to ribs long after the coals turned cold. Somewhere beyond the huts, stones mark a path to the old hidden valley, now a meadow of bent grass and scattered goat droppings. Those who tend goats here hum ancestor tunes to keep envy's paws dull. They plant reeds in the river's shallows, so floods remember who they owe their hush to. You drift through it all across clay walls, pocked with thumbprints of children who dream of crowns that don't slip in the hush of night. Over the fire pits, where fish sizzle and gossip simmers in equal measure, through soft laughter that rattles envy's bones deep under the oldest boundary stones. And when dusk curls the hush tighter than any reed cord, the people gather by the temple, pressing palms to stones older than memory, whispering half-truths that grow taller than mountains when the hush wants them to. A kingdom born of whispers, goats, and drifting sparks stitched together forever in the hush that envy still circles but never quite breaks. So now, let this hush drift with you. Picture those first sparks, embers tucked under ash, so the next dawn could find them warm enough to bind one more promise. Let your breath ease like river fog across stone. Imagine soft goat bleats echoing through valley mist, the hush of tiny footfalls pattering toward a new fire circle, not yet drawn in envy's ink. Outside your window, the world holds its own quiet. Maybe a breeze hums against the glass. Maybe a single street lamp flickers like that first torch carried through thorn and shadow. Let the hush settle into your bones. Old promises, soft drums of trust against ribs, worn thin by daylight's clamor. If your eyelids grow heavy, lean into it. Drift with the hush, where goat trails become kingdom roads, where boundary stones remember secrets better left unsaid. Somewhere the ancestors still hum soft, stubborn tunes, stitched through every hush that binds worry shut for the night. And if sleep doesn't come just yet, that's all right too. Let the hush carry you a little further. Your breath, slow your thoughts, softer than reed smoke. Trust that envy lies curled at the edges, too drowsy to bite tonight.